Scott Pelley with CBS News, along with my colleague Major Garrett of National Journal. In just under a year now, Americans will go to the polls to choose a president. Tonight, CBS News and National Journal are pleased to bring you a discussion of the issues by the Republican candidates for their party's nomination. The focus will be foreign policy and national security, the president's role as commander-in-chief. Consider this. The 9/11 attacks came in the 8th month of a new presidency, the Bay of Pigs in the 13th week, and the Civil War on the 40th day of a new presidency. Reminders from history that a president must be prepared to deal with a crisis from day one. The ground rules for tonight's debate are simple. A candidate who is asked a question will have 1 minute to respond, and then at the discretion of the moderators, there can be a 30-second follow-up or a 30-second rebuttal from another candidate. The debate will run a total of 90 minutes. The first hour will be broadcast right here on the CBS television network. The entire 90 minutes will be streamed on cbsnews.com and nationaljournal.com. And we invite you to submit questions during the debate to either website. Joining me now in asking the questions, Major Garrett.
Scott, thank you very much. One more piece of housekeeping. Let's introduce the candidates. Former Utah Governor Jon Huntsman. Representing the 6th District of Minnesota, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann. Representing the 14th District of Texas, Congressman Ron Paul. From Atlanta, Georgia, businessman Herman Cain. Former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. Current Texas Governor Rick Perry. And former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum. Mr. Cain, I'd like to begin this evening with you, sir.
Yes.
This week, a UN nuclear watchdog agency provided additional credible evidence that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon. If you were president right now, what would you do specifically that this administration is not doing to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon?
The first thing that I would do is to assist the opposition movement in Iran that's trying to overthrow the regime. Our enemies are not the people of Iran, it's the regime. And a regime change is what they are trying to achieve. Secondly, we need to put economic pressure on Iran by way of our own energy independence strategy. By having our own energy independence strategy, we will impact the price of oil on the world market, because Iran uses oil not only as a means of currency, but they use it as a weapon. One of the reasons that they are able to afford that nuclear weapons program is because of oil. Secondly, we would then work to increase sanctions on Iran along with our friends and our allies. So whereas we will not be, where I do believe that they have a nuclear weapons program and they are closer to having a nuclear weapon, stopping them, the only way we can stop them is through economic means.
A quick follow-up, Mr. Cain.
Yes.
When you say assisting the opposition, would you entertain military assistance to that opposition?
No, so not at this time. I would not entertain military opposition. I'm talking about to help the opposition movement within the country. And then there's one other thing that we could do. We could deploy our ballistic missile defense capable Aegis warships strategically in that part of the world. We have the biggest fleet of those warships in the world, and we could use them strategically in the event that they were able to fire a ballistic missile.
Governor Romney, would it be worth going to war to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon?
Well, let's start back from there, and let's talk about where we are. This is, of course, President Obama's greatest failing from a foreign policy standpoint, which is he recognized the gravest threat that America and the world faced was a nuclear Iran, and he did not do what was necessary to get Iran to be dissuaded from their nuclear folly. What he should have done is speak out when dissidents took to the streets and say America is with you, and work on a covert basis to encourage the dissidents. Number two, he should have put in place crippling sanctions against Iran. But instead of getting Russia, for instance, to when he gave in our missile defense system to agree to stand with those crippling sanctions, he gave Russia what they wanted, their #1 foreign policy objective, and got nothing in return.
That's the time, Governor, on the question. We're going to adhere to time very quickly, but let me...
I get 60 seconds.
Yes, sir, and
that was 30.
The 60...
Sorry, it started at yellow, so I have much more time to go.
You know what, Governor? I stand corrected. Yeah. You are right. Please continue.
All right, thank you. Finally, the president should have built credible threat of military action and made it very clear that the United States of America is willing, in the final analysis, if necessary, to take military action to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Look, one thing you can know, and that is if we re-elect Barack Obama, Iran will have a nuclear weapon. And if we elect Mitt Romney, if you elect me as the next president, they will not have a nuclear weapon.
But, sir, you just described where we are today, and that's what you're going to have to deal with if you become president. How do you prevent them from obtaining a nuclear weapon? Is it worth going to war to prevent that?
Well, it's worth putting in place crippling sanctions. It's worth working with the insurgents in the country to encourage regime change in the country. And if all else fails, if after all of the work we've done, there's nothing else we can do besides take military action, then of course you take military action. It is unacceptable for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. We will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. This term unacceptable has been applied by several presidents over history, and our current president has made it very clear that he's not willing to do those things necessary to get Iran to be dissuaded from their nuclear folly. I will take a different course. I will make sure that the sanctions, diplomatic pressure, economic pressure, and support of insurgents within the country help them become dissuaded to get away from their nuclear ambition.
This time it is time.
Yeah, and finally, have that military threat out there.
On the follow-ups. Yeah. We're going to try to adhere to the time.
Mr. Speaker, is this the right way to look at this question, war or not war? Or do you see other options diplomatically or other non-war means that the United States has at its possession with dealing with Iran that it has not employed?
Well, let me start and say that both the answers you just got are superior to the current administration. You know, there are a number of ways to be smart about Iran and relatively few ways to be dumb, and the administration skipped all the ways to be smart.
Could you tell us the smart ways,
sure.
Mr. Speaker?
First of all, maximum covert operations to block and disrupt the Iranian program, including taking out their scientists, including breaking up their systems, all of it covertly, all of it deniable. Second, maximum coordination with the Israelis in a way which allows them to maximize their impact in Iran. Third, absolute strategic program comparable to what President Reagan, Pope John Paul II, and Margaret Thatcher did to the Soviet Union, of every possible aspect short of war, of breaking the regime and bringing it down. And I agree entirely with Governor Romney. If in the end, despite all of those things, the dictatorship persists, you have to take whatever steps are necessary to break its capacity to have a nuclear weapon.
Congressman Paul, let me follow up with you for just 30 seconds. Is it worth going to war to prevent a nuclear weapon in Iran?
No, it isn't worthwhile. And the only way you would do that is you would have to go to the Congress. We as Commander-in-Chief aren't making the decision to go to war. You know, the old-fashioned way, the Constitution, you go to the Congress and find out if our national security is threatened. And I'm afraid what's going on right now is similar to the war propaganda that went on against Iraq. And, you know, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction, and it was orchestrated, and it was, to me, a tragedy of what's happened these last 10 years, the death and destruction, $4 trillion in debt. So, no, it's not worthwhile going to war. If you do, you get a declaration of war, and you fight it, and you win it, and get it over with.
Thank you, Congressman. Governor Perry, what's your appraisal of the combat situation on the ground in Afghanistan today, and what would you change?
Let me answer the previous question very quickly, if I may.
Governor, I'd like to move on. Could you give me a sense of your appraisal of the combat situation?
I have a minute, and I can do both in 1 minute, I'll promise you.
Yeah. There you go.
And the issue that has not been raised is that this country can sanction the Iranian central bank right now and shut down that country's economy. And that's what this president needs to do, and the American people need to stand up and force him to make that stand today. Now, let me address this issue of Afghanistan and how we deal with it. The mission must be completed there. The idea that we will have wasted our treasure and the lives of young Americans to not secure Afghanistan is not appropriate. But the idea that we would give a timetable to our enemy is irresponsible from a military standpoint. It's irresponsible from the lives of our young men and women, and it is irresponsible leadership of this president to give a timetable to pull out of any country that we're in conflict with.
But, Governor, if I can just follow up for 30 seconds. The question was, what's your appraisal of the combat situation on the ground there, and what would you change as Commander-in-Chief?
Well, obviously, we're discussing with our commanders on the field about what's going on in Afghanistan. I think we're making progress there. The issue is training up the Afghan security forces so that we're comfortable that they can protect that citizenry and continue to take the war to the terrorists that are using Afghanistan and Pakistan, I might add. Is a very complex part of the world, but I think that our military is doing the best job that they can, considering the lack of support that they're getting from this administration, telegraphing to the enemy when we're going to pull out.
Senator Santorum, I know you want to jump in on Iran. I'll give you that opportunity here just a second, so let me merge two things if I could, just 1 second. The Taliban said earlier this summer, quote, "The Afghans have an endless stamina for a long war." If you were commander-in-chief, would you have endless stamina for victory in Afghanistan, and would you this evening define victory in Afghanistan for the American people? And please weigh in, I know you do want to, on Iran.
Thank you very much, Major. I appreciate that. Victory against the Taliban in Afghanistan is that the Taliban is a neutered force. They are no longer a security threat to the Afghan people or to our country. That would be victory. Doesn't mean wipe them out. You can't wipe them out, but they're no longer a security threat. The bigger issue, and I know there's those of us at the end who don't get a lot of questions, and so this is the most important national security issue that we're going to be dealing with here in this year, and that's the issue of Iran getting a nuclear weapon. I think everyone should have the opportunity to answer that question, particularly me. I've been working on Iran since back in 2004, and I proposed exactly the things that Herman and Mitt Romney suggested, which was to give money to the rebel forces there to help the pro-democracy movement and to put tough sanctions in place. I was opposed by President Bush, and yet we were able to overcome that and pass the Iran Freedom and Support Act. I was able to get that done, and then President Bush didn't provide money for the pro-democracy movement, and President Obama cut that money. We have a situation that's different. I disagree with Newt. More sanctions and providing, more support for the pro-democracy movement isn't going to be enough in time. Read the IAEA report.
Senator, I'm sorry, that's time. I'm sorry. We're going to try to adhere to time and be fair to everyone in the application of that rule.
I understand. Just let me finish my final comment. My final comment is we should be working with Israel right now to do what they did in Syria, what they did in Iraq, which is take out that nuclear capability before the next explosion we hear in Iran is a nuclear one, and then the world changes.
That is time. Thank you. Representative Bachmann, do you think the 30,000 surge troops in Afghanistan have made a difference, and if so, where?
They absolutely have, but it's unfortunate. The request was made for 40,000 troops. President Obama dithered for approximately 2 months when he should have given the full complement of 40,000 troops. When he gave 30,000 troops to the effort in Afghanistan, that meant that a decision had to be made. With 40,000 troops, they could have conducted the war going into the southern province in Helmand and also going into the eastern province and dealing with the problem all at once and coming to victory that much sooner and bringing our troops home. When 30,000 troops were given, then our troops did the very best that they could by going into the south and dealing in the Helmand province. We actually have seen improvement down by Kandahar. That's a very good thing, and that's because of the brave actions by our men and women in that area. However, we have to recognize now President Obama has made a very fatal decision in Afghanistan. He's made the decision that by next September, our troops will be withdrawn. If that is the case, how do we expect any of our allies to continue to work with us? How can we even begin to seek the peace with the Haqqani network that are in the eastern region?
Thank you, Congressman Bachmann. Thank you very much. Let me come over to you, Governor Huntsman, and ask you, we are seeing spikes in casualties in Afghanistan in new places. Can you explain to me what's happening there and how you would change that as Commander-in-Chief?
Well, I think the spikes obviously are driven by lack of security, proper security in certain parts of the country, which could plague us for a very, very long time to come. I take a different approach on Afghanistan. I say it's time to come home. I say this nation has achieved its key objectives in Afghanistan. We've had free elections in 2004. We've uprooted the Taliban. We've dismantled al-Qaeda. We have killed Osama bin Laden. I say this nation's future is not Afghanistan. This nation's future is not Iraq. This nation's future is how prepared we are to meet the 21st century competitive challenges. That's economic and that's education, and that's going to play out over the Asia-Pacific region, and we're either prepared for that reality or we're not. I don't want to be nation building in Afghanistan when this nation so desperately needs to be built.
Make sure I understand. Bring all the troops home today.
Here's what I would keep behind, because we still have work to do. We don't need 100,000 troops nation building, many of whom can't cross the wire. I think we need a component that gathers tactical intelligence. We need enhanced special forces response capability for rapid response, and we need some ongoing commitment to train the local Afghan National Army. That's not 100,000 troops. That's well south of that. We are fighting an asymmetric threat, a counter-terror threat, not only there, but in Waziristan and every other corner of the world, and we need to prepare for that as a reality of our 21st century foreign policy.
And that's time. Thank you, sir.
Governor Romney, a much smaller footprint in Afghanistan, do you support that? And secondarily, sir, is it time, or would it ever be time, for the United States to negotiate with the Taliban?
We don't negotiate with terrorists. I'd not negotiate with the Taliban. That's something for the Afghans to decide how they're going to pursue their course in the future. With regards to our footprint in Afghanistan, the right course is for us to do our very best to secure the victories that have been so hard won by the soldiers, the men and women of our fighting forces who've been in Afghanistan. The commanders on the field feel that we can take out 30,000 to 40,000 troops sometime by the end of next year. The commander-in-chief, perhaps looking at the calendar of the election, decided to bring them home in September instead, in the middle of the fighting season. Our commander said that puts our troops at risk, at danger. Please don't pull them out there, they said. But he said, no, I'm going to get them out early. I think that was a mistake. Our surge troops should have been withdrawn by December of next year, not by September. And the timetable by the end of 2014 is the right timetable for us to be completely withdrawn from Afghanistan, other than a small footprint of support forces.
Mr. Speaker, how do you achieve peace in Afghanistan if you don't negotiate with the Taliban?
I don't think you do.
Would you agree that the Taliban...
I think this is so much bigger and deeper a problem than we've talked about as a country, that we don't have a clue how hard this is going to be. First of all, the Taliban survives for the very same reason that historically we've said guerrillas always survive, which is they have a sanctuary. The sanctuary is Pakistan. You're never going to stop the Taliban as long as they can hide. And you have proof every week in new bombings and new killings and new training. So I think this has to be a much larger strategic discussion that starts with, frankly, Pakistan on the one end and Iran on the other, because Afghanistan is in between the two countries and is the least important of the three countries.
Related to that, Mr. Kaine, I'd like to pick up on a point that Speaker Gingrich just made. You have said about foreign policy, America needs to be clear about who its friends are and who its foes are. So this evening, sir, Pakistan, friend or foe?
We don't know, because Pakistan is not clear, because Pakistan is where Osama bin Laden was found and eliminated. Secondly, Pakistan has had a conversation with President Karzai from Afghanistan, and President Karzai has said that if the United States gets into a dispute with Pakistan, then Afghanistan is going to side with Pakistan. There is a lot of clarity missing, like Speaker Gingrich says, in this whole region, and they are all interrelated. So there isn't a clear answer as to whether or not Pakistan is a friend or foe. That relationship must be reevaluated.
If you were president, sir, and your National Security Council asked you what questions you would want answered to find out a better answer to this very question, what would you tell them?
I would ask them, what commitments is Pakistan willing to make to assure the United States of America that they are a friend or a foe, and be specific about that. Will they make commitments relative to the commitment of their military? If we have to make commitments, are they willing to come to some regional agreement about what we need to do? We need a regional strategy in that area of the world, such that all of our allies, we work together in order to come up with those things that will be mutually beneficial to everyone. Those are the questions that need to be asked.
Governor Perry, why is Pakistan playing a double game? Saying that it supports the United States one moment and then supporting terrorists who are killing American troops the next. What's going on there?
Listen, I think we're having an interesting conversation here, but the deeper one is that the Speaker makes a reference to is the whole issue of foreign aid. And we need a President of the United States working with a Congress that sends a clear message to every country. It doesn't make any difference whether it's Pakistan or whether it's Afghanistan or whether it's India. The foreign aid budget in my administration for every country is going to start at $0. $0. And then we'll have a conversation. Then we'll have a conversation in this country about whether or not a penny of our taxpayer dollars needs to go into those countries. And Pakistan is clearly sending us messages, Mitt. It's clearly sending us messages that they don't deserve our foreign aid that we're getting because they're not being honest with us. American soldiers' lives are being put at jeopardy because of that country and the decisions that they're made. And it's time for us as a country to say no to foreign aid to countries that don't support the United States of America.
That's time, Governor. Governor, let me give you 30 seconds in the follow-up to go back to the question. Why is Pakistan playing this double game? Help us understand what's going on there.
They've been doing this for years. Their political people are not who are in charge of that country. It's the military. It's the Secret Service. That's who's running that country. And I don't trust them. And we need to send clear messages. We need to do foreign aid completely different. I'm telling you, no dollars going into those countries. As a matter of fact, if they want any American aid, any country, unless we say differently, then American manufacturing, big companies, small companies, going in to help create economic impact in those countries,
Governor.
rather than just dollars flowing into some administration.
Thank you very much.
Congresswoman Bachmann, you serve on the Intelligence Committee. I'd like to get your assessment of what you think is happening in Pakistan, especially with the Haqqani Network. And you know from sitting on that committee that those in the diplomatic corps in this country and even the intelligence community believe that there is a tangible benefit at times to properly applied foreign aid from this country. So I want to know if you agree with the governor on that question, starting at zero, and also your assessment of the intelligence situation in Pakistan and what we should do about it.
Pakistan is a very difficult area because they have been housing terrorists, and terrorists have been training there, Al-Qaeda as well as Haqqani, as well as other militias dealing with terrorist organizations. But I would not agree with that assessment to pull all foreign aid from Pakistan. I would reduce foreign aid to many, many countries, but there's a problem because Pakistan has a nuclear weapon. We have more people affiliated with Al-Qaeda closer to that nuclear bomb than in any other nation. This is an extremely important issue, and I think it underscores exactly why the next commander-in-chief has to understand from day one the intricacies that are happening in the Middle East. This is a very dangerous time. If you look at Iran and if you look at Pakistan and if you look at the link with Syria, because Iran is working through proxies like Syria, through Hezbollah, through Hamas, it seems that the table is being set for a worldwide nuclear war against Israel. And if there's anything that we know, President Obama has been more than willing to stand with Occupy Wall Street, but he hasn't been willing to stand with Israel. Israel looks at President Obama and they do not see a friend.
Congresswoman, thank you. Speaker Gingrich, you presided as Speaker over several foreign aid budgets for the United States, and I remember covering in 1995 the intervention on behalf of the Mexican peso. You have seen at times the proper role of the United States through foreign aid and other interventions. I want to know if you agree with Governor Perry about starting at zero.
Absolutely. I mean, what he said made absolutely perfect sense. Why would you start every year? And consider the alternative. You're giving some countries $7 billion a year. So you start off, or in the case of Egypt, $3 billion a year. So you start off every year and say, here's your $3 billion, now I'll start thinking. You ought to start off at zero and say, explain to me why I should give you a penny. And let me tell you, the fact that the Pakistanis, and think about this, the Pakistanis hid bin Laden for at least 6 years in a military city within a mile of their National Defense University, and then they got mad at the people who turned him over to us, and we think those are the acts of allies? I think it's a pretty good idea to start at zero and sometimes stay there.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Speaker. Since you mentioned Egypt, Mr. Speaker, I just want to know if you were president, if the aid that we currently provide on an annualized basis to Egypt would be completely rethought and possibly eliminated, if you were president.
It would certainly be completely rethought, and candidly, the degree to which the Arab Spring may become an anti-Christian spring is something which bothers me a great deal, and I would certainly have the State Department intervening on behalf of the Coptic Christians who are being persecuted under the new system, having their churches burned, having people killed, and I'd be pretty insistent that we are not going to be supportive of a regime which is explicitly hostile to religions other than Islam.
Senator Santorum, if a Pakistani nuclear weapon goes missing, what do you do?
Well, let me just stop back and say I disagree with a lot of what was said up here. Pakistan must be a friend of the United States for the reason that Michelle outlined. Pakistan is a nuclear power, and there are people in that country that if they gain control of that country will create a situation equal to the situation that is now percolating in Iran. So we can't be indecisive about whether Pakistan is our friend. They must be our friend. And we must engage them as friends, get over the difficulties we have, as we did with Saudi Arabia, with respect to the events of 9/11. The terrorists came from Saudi Arabia, and we said, well, you know what? It's important for us to maintain that relationship in spite of those difficulties. And it's important for us with a nuclear power, with a very vast number of people in Pakistan who are radicalizing, that we keep a solid and stable relationship and work through our difficulties. It is that important, and we must maintain that relationship.
But the Pakistanis back a terrorist network, the Haqqani network, that laid siege to the NATO headquarters and the U.S. Embassy in Kabul for 20 hours a few weeks ago.
Well, the Pakistanis
How do you make friends out of Pakistan?
A lot of the Pakistanis and most of the government would say they don't back the Haqqani network, and the Haqqani network causes as much trouble in Pakistan as it has caused us in Afghanistan. We need to work with the elements of Pakistan, and there are elements in the government of Pakistan and the military. We need to continue those joint exercises. We need to continue the aid relationship. And of course, we all know the aid relationship when it comes to military aid is all spent in the United States. So it's not giving money away. It's sending military hardware, which creates jobs in this country, to those countries, creating nexus in relationships and dependency on our weapon systems that's important for those future relationships.
Senator, we'll have to leave it right there. We will have more of the Republican Commander-in-Chief debate in just a moment. Welcome back to Spartanburg, South Carolina, and the Republican Commander-in-Chief debate. I'm Scott Pelley with CBS News, along with Major Garrett of National Journal.
Thanks again, Scott. Mr. Speaker, you said yesterday that Governor Romney is a competent manager, but you said you were unsure if he was really capable of changing Washington. You said you were the change agent. Based on the arc of this campaign and perhaps what you've heard tonight, would you care to evaluate Governor Romney's ability to think outside the box and change the United States' national security or foreign policy perspectives?
No.
You said so last night, sir. Then what was the point, sir? Then what was the point, sir, of bringing it up yesterday on a national radio show?
I brought it up yesterday because I was on a national radio show. I think he brings up things when he's on national radio shows. We're here tonight talking to the American people about why every single one of us is better than Barack Obama, and that's a topic I'd rather say.
Then, Mr. Speaker, if you would like to...
By the way, let me just say, compared to this administration, talking about a friend who's a great business manager as a good manager is an enormous improvement over Barack Obama.
Then, Mr. Speaker, I will remember you talking as Speaker about the necessity of leaders to think outside the box.
Yes.
If you were president, how would you think outside the box about some of the issues we've discussed here tonight?
Oh, in a number of ways. As I said earlier, I would explicitly adopt the Reagan, John Paul II, Thatcher strategy towards Iran. I would do the same thing towards North Korea. I would adopt a very strong policy towards the United Nations of dramatically taking on its absurdities. I would explicitly repudiate what Obama's done on Agenda 21 as the kind of interference from the United Nations that's wrong. There are a number of other areas. I would also, frankly, apply Lean Six Sigma to the Pentagon to liberate the money to rebuild the Navy. We need a capital investment program, and this administration is shrinking the Navy to a point where it's going to be incapable of doing its job worldwide. So there are a number of places I would be thinking outside the box.
And that's time, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. Mr. Kaine, you've often said that you'll listen to your generals for their advice before making decisions as Commander-in-Chief. How will you know when you should overrule your generals?
The approach to making a critical decision, first make sure that you surround yourself with the right people. And I feel that I'll be able to make that assessment when we put together the cabinet and all of the people from the military, etc. You will know you're making the right decision when you consider all the facts and ask them for alternatives. It is up to the commander-in-chief to make that judgment call based upon all the facts. And because I'll have a multiple group of people offering different recommendations, this gives me the best opportunity to select the one that makes the most amount of sense. But ultimately, it's up to the commander-in-chief to make that decision.
Senator Santorum, this is really a question about how you build a leadership model. How, sir, would you decide when it was necessary for you as commander-in-chief to overrule the advice you get from either your civilian advisors or your military advisors?
Well, I'll come into to the office of presidency with a very clear agenda, and we'll get people together that will share my point of view. When I was in the United States Senate, I didn't hire people who didn't share how I approach the problem. That's what the people of this country are electing. They're electing someone who's going to be very crystal clear, and as you heard from my first two answers, I don't mince words. I say exactly what I believe, and then I follow through and do what I say. I did that when I was in public life before. Even though I represented a state that wasn't a particularly conservative state, I followed through and did that, and I will surround myself with people who will execute what I promised the American public to do, and then we will go about the process of doing it.
You mentioned your agenda. If you could prioritize 1 or 2 points, maybe more if you'd like, what your key agenda is on national security.
Well, obviously, the issue we were talking about before, which is, number one, Iran must not get a nuclear weapon, and we will go about whatever it takes to make sure that happens. I hope that some of the things that I've talked about here and new thing that I've been talking about for a while, which is covert activity. You know, there have been scientists turning up dead in Russia and in Iran. There have been computer viruses. There have been problems at their facility. I hope that the United States has been involved with that. I hope that we've been doing everything we can covertly to make sure that that program doesn't proceed forward. And if we're lucky enough, and I'm not sure we will be, that if no action is taken and we still don't have a nuclear Iran, that would be my laser beam focus to make sure that would not happen.
And that's time, Senator. Thank you very much. Governor Perry, you advocate the elimination of the Department of Energy. If you eliminate the Department of Energy...
Glad you remembered it.
I've had some time to think about it, sir.
Me too.
If you eliminate the Department of Energy, what do you do with the nuclear weapons?
Well, there are plenty of places in our government that can have oversight on our nuclear energy. But let me back over to the question that you asked before this about what is the most important thing from a strategic standpoint, Commander-in-Chief. For 10 years, I have been the Commander-in-Chief of over 20,000 plus individuals in the state of Texas as we've dealt with a host of either natural disasters or having deployments into the combat zones. So if there's someone on this stage who has had that hands-on commander-in-chief experience, it is me, as the governor of the state of Texas. I've dealt with generals. I have individuals at the Department of Defense who have been at the highest levels, both on the civilian side and on the military side, that will help me make decisions about those issues that we face as a country. So I feel very comfortable from day one of surrounding myself with individuals who have extraordinary backgrounds in national defense and will be able to put this country on a track that Americans will feel we know that we're going to be secure,
and that's
including
time,
the southern border of this country with Mexico.
And that's time. Thank you.
I don't need to tell the people on this stage that presidential politics is interactive business, and of course this debate is interactive as well. And we have an email question, I'm happy to say, emailed into the National Journal, and it comes from Stephen Shafroth of the Dells, Oregon. And I'd like to address this question to Mr. Kane. Stephen writes, I served on an aircraft carrier during the Vietnam War. I believe that torture is always wrong in all cases. What is your stance on torture?
I believe in following the procedures that have been established by our military. I do not agree with torture, period. However, I will trust the judgment of our military leaders to determine what is torture and what is not torture. That is the critical consideration.
Mr. Kane, of course, you're familiar with the long-running debate we've had about whether waterboarding constitutes torture or is it an enhanced interrogation technique. In the last campaign, Republican nominee John McCain and Barack Obama agreed that it was torture and should not be allowed legally, and that the Army Field Manual should be the methodology used to interrogate enemy combatants. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree, sir?
I agree that it was an enhanced interrogation technique.
And then you would support it as president. You would return to that policy.
I would return to that policy. I don't see it as torture. I see it as an enhanced interrogation technique.
Congresswoman Bachmann, your opinion on this question that our emailer asked.
If I were president, I would be willing to use waterboarding. I think it was very effective. It gained information for our country. And I also would like to say that today, under Barack Obama, he is allowing the ACLU to run the CIA. You need to understand that today when we interdict a terrorist on the battlefield, we have no jail for them. We have nowhere to take them. We have no CIA interrogation anymore. It is as though we have decided we want to lose in the war on terror under President Obama. That's not my strategy. My strategy will be that the United States will be victorious in the war on terror.
Congressman Paul, my spidey sense tells me we have a debate about to get launched here. I know you have an opinion you'd like to weigh in.
Yes. Torture is illegal, and by our laws, it's illegal by international laws.
How do you define torture, sir?
Well, waterboarding is torture, and many other things. It's illegal under international law and under our law. It's also immoral, and it's also very impractical. There's no evidence that you really get reliable evidence. Why would you accept the position of torturing 100 people because you know one person might have information? And that's what you do when you accept the principle of torture. I think it's uncivilized and have no practical advantages, and it's really un-American to accept on principle that we will torture people that we capture.
And
Major,
that's time.
Major, I have to weigh in on this. I have to say something.
I'm sorry, Congresswoman, just a moment, if you would, please. Let's give Governor Huntsman an opportunity to take 30 seconds on that question.
Gets a little lonely over here in Siberia from time to time.
Tell me about it.
First of all, let me thank the sailor on the ship. I have 2 boys in the United States Navy, and all they want to do is go on to fight, protect, and defend the great freedoms that we share in this country. This country has values. We have a name brand in the world. I've lived overseas 4 times. I've been an ambassador for my country 3 times. I've lived overseas and done business. We diminish our standing in the world, and the values that we project, which include liberty, democracy, human rights, and open markets, when we torture. We should not torture. Waterboarding is torture. We dilute ourselves down like a whole lot of other countries, and we lose that ability to project values that a lot of people in corners of this world are still relying on the United States to stand up for.
And that is time. Thank you, sir. Governor Romney, recently President Obama ordered the death of an American citizen who was suspected of terrorist activity overseas. Is it appropriate for the American president, on the president's say-so alone, to order the death of an American citizen suspected of terrorism?
Absolutely. In this case, this is an individual who had aligned himself with a group that had declared war on the United States of America. And if there's someone that's going to join with a group like Al-Qaeda that declares war on America, and we're in a war with that entity, then of course anyone who is bearing arms with that entity is fair game for the United States of America. Let me go back. Let me go back and just talk for a moment about the issue that a number of people have spoken about, which is their definition of how their foreign policy might be different than this president. My foreign policy is pretty straightforward. I would be guided by an overwhelming conviction that this century must be an American century. where America has the strongest values, the strongest economy, and the strongest military. And an American century means a century where America leads the free world and the free world leads the entire world. We have a president right now who thinks America is just another nation. America is an exceptional nation. We have a president who thinks that the way to conduct foreign policy is through his personal affects on other people. I believe the way to conduct foreign policy is with American strength. Everything I do will make America stronger, and I will stand and use whatever means necessary within the law to make sure that we protect America's citizens and Americans' rights.
And that's time, Governor. Ladies and gentlemen, the applause are lovely, but we will not have booing. Thank you very much. We'll have courtesy for all of the candidates on the stage. Speaker Gingrich, if I could just ask you the same question. As President of the United States, would you sign that death warrant for an American citizen overseas who you believe is a terrorist suspect?
Well, he's not a terrorist suspect. He's a person who was found guilty under review of actively seeking the death of Americans.
Not found guilty by a court, sir.
He was found guilty by a panel that looked at it and reported to the president.
Well, that's extrajudicial. It's not the rule of law.
It is the rule of law. That is explicitly false. It is the rule of law. No. If you engage in war against the United States, you are an enemy combatant. You have none of the civil liberties in the United States. You cannot go to court. Let me be very clear about this at two levels. There's a huge gap here that frankly, far too many people get confused over. Civil defense, criminal defense, is a function of being within the American law. Waging war on the United States is outside criminal law. It is an act of war and should be dealt with as an act of war, and the correct thing in an act of war is to kill people who are trying to kill you.
Governor Perry, with your indulgence, sir, I'd like to change the subject a little bit to China. According to U.S. officials, China is using cyber attacks to steal billions of dollars of intellectual property that is critical to this nation's economic success. Are we, sir, engaged in financial warfare with China?
Listen, there are some people who have made the statement that the 21st century is going to be the century of China, and that, you know, we've had our time in the sunshine. I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. As a matter of fact, you think back to the 1980s, and we faced a similar type of a situation with Russia. And Ronald Reagan said that Russia would end up on the ash heap of history, and he was right. Mitt, I happen to think that the communist Chinese government will end up on the ash heap of history if they do not change their virtues. It is important for a country to have virtues, virtues of honesty. And this whole issue of allowing cybersecurity to go on, we need to use all of our resources. The private sector working along with our government to really standing up the Cyber Command in 2010 was a good start on that. But fighting this cyber war, I would suggest, is one of the great issues that will face the next president of the United States, and we must win it.
Governor, thank you. That's time. Governor Romney, I wonder, how would you manage China to avoid a 21st century Cold War?
Well, China has an interest in trade. China wants to, as they have 20 million people coming out of the farms and coming into the cities every year, they want to be able to put them to work. They want to have access to global markets. And so we have right now something they need very badly, which is access to our market, and our friends around the world have that same power over China. We need to make sure that we let them understand that in order for them to continue to have free and open access to the thing they want so badly, our markets, they have to play by the rules. They can't hack into our computer systems and steal from our government. They can't steal from corporations. They can't take patents and designs, intellectual property, and duplicate them and counterfeit them and sell them around the world. And they also can't manipulate their currency in such a way as to make their prices well below what they otherwise would be. We have to have China understand that, like everybody else on the world stage, they have to play by the rules. And if they do, we'll have open trade with them and work with them, and they should in every way want to collaborate with us and not become a belligerent nation economically or militarily. But if you just continue to sit back and let them run over us, the policies of Barack Obama in China have allowed China to continue to expand their entry into our computer systems, their entry, stealing our intellectual property, and of course their military capacity as well.
Governor, but I would like to ask you a follow-up on that point. You talk about all the things that China should be doing. How do you affect that as Commander-in-Chief? How do you make China do these things?
Well, number one on day one is acknowledging something which everyone knows. They're a currency manipulator. And on that basis, we also go before the WTO and bring an action against them as a currency manipulator, and that allows us to apply selectively tariffs where we believe they are stealing our intellectual property, hacking into our computers, or artificially lowering their prices and killing American jobs. We can't just sit back and let China run all over us. People say, well, you'll start a trade war. There's one going on right now, folks. They're stealing our jobs, and we're going to stand up to China.
Governor Huntsman, Governor Romney just said we're in the middle of a war that we're not even declared or we're not even aware of. And Governor Perry said China will end up on the ash heap of history. You've been in China. You were the ambassador for our nation there under President Obama. What's your reaction?
Well, the reality is a little different, as it usually is when you're on the ground. And I've tried to figure this out for 30 years of my career. First of all, I don't think you can take China to the WTO on currency-related issues. Second, I don't know that this country needs a trade war with China. Who does it hurt? Our small businesses in South Carolina, our exporters, our agriculture producers. We don't need that at a time when China is about to embark on a generational transition. So what should we be doing? We should be reaching out to our allies and constituencies within China. They're called the young people. They're called the Internet generation. There are 500 million Internet users in
Governor,
China,
we're going to have
80 million bloggers, and they are bringing about change, the likes of which is going to take China down.
We're going to have
while
to leave
we
it
have
there,
an opportunity
Governor.
to go up and win back our economic
Governor,
manufacturing muscle. That's all I want to do as president.
I thank you very much. We will be back with the Republican Commander-in-Chief debate from Wofford College in just a moment. I'm back to South Carolina and the Republican Commander-in-Chief debate. Governor Perry, we just got a question via Twitter from Barbara McMahon. And Barbara asked this question of you. Does Governor Perry's foreign aid starts at zero include Israel?
Well, at Governor Perry would tweet back to her that absolutely every country would start at zero. Obviously, Israel is a special ally. And my bet is that we would be funding them at some substantial level. But it makes sense for everyone to come in at zero and make your case. As a matter of fact, we ought to try doing that with some of those agencies that I was trying to think the name of the other night. Starting at zero, zero-based budgeting, and Newt will share with you, is we've got to go there, and everyone has to come in and make their case. That's what the American people are doing. There's somebody at home sitting watching TV tonight, looking for a job, and they're having to budget. Why in the world would our federal government get a pass on sending our tax dollars to any country
And Governor,
without having an answer?
We're going to have to leave it right there. I thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the first hour of the debate. Some CBS stations will be leaving us, but you can continue to follow the debate online on CBSNews.com and NationalJournal.com, and you can submit questions for the candidates at either of those sites. Most of our stations in South Carolina and on the West Coast will continue to broadcast the debate. When we return, we will take questions from South Carolina's two senators, United States Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Jim DeMint. With thanks to the candidates, thanks to Wofford College, thanks to the GOP of South Carolina, I'm Scott Pelley. South Carolina, this is the Republican Commander-in-Chief debate. I'm Scott Pelley with CBS News, along with Major Garrett of National Journal. This is the final half hour of this 90-minute Republican debate. The focus tonight, national security and foreign affairs. And in this half hour, we'll include your questions. You may submit them online at cbsnews.com and nationaljournal.com. And we will have the questions of South Carolina Senators Lindsey Graham and Jim DeMint. So, Let's continue.
Indeed, Scott. We have a question from Josh Cooper from Woodsboro, Massachusetts. Congresswoman Bachmann, he writes in as this debate was going on, quote, almost half of the federal budget goes to military-related expenditures. Should we increase spending, especially in a debt crisis?
Well, the military is also able to have expenditures reduced as well, and I think probably the best place is in the area of how we finance procurement. Today we have a situation where we reward those who are designing and making our weaponry based upon the length of time that they take it to produce it. We don't do that anywhere else. So rather than having a cost plus fee, we need to have a fixed cost system. We'll save money, and also TRICARE could use reform as well. Those are two areas where we yield significant savings. But what we cannot do is cut back on the effort regarding our troops and making sure they're fully resourced.
A quick follow-up, Congresswoman. Can you name a weapon system that you think should be ended for fiscal reasons? And when you talk about TRICARE, that's the military medical system. What do you mean when you say reform? Does that mean cuts in benefits?
No, I think that we need to have modernization. That's what the biggest problem is right now with Social Security, with Medicare, with Medicaid. We're continuing to abide by the models that we had when they were first originated. There's very few businesses that maintain their similar business practices 45 years after inception or 75 years after inception. We have to modernize. But we also know what the future is in health care, don't we? It is Obamacare. And quite likely, TRICARE, Medicare, all of these will collapse under President Obama, and everyone will be put into Obamacare. No one wants to be in Obamacare.
And
that's why, as Commander-in-Chief, I'll repeal Obamacare.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kaine, would you describe what you think is happening in the Arab Spring, and how, as president, can you affect that to make it work for the United States and not against us?
What's happening in the Arab Spring, you have to look at Libya, Egypt, Yemen, and all of the revolutions that are going on, and how this administration has mishandled them. As a result, they have gotten totally out of hand. Our relationship with Egypt may not survive, because when this president backed the opposition, it turned out that the opposition was more of the Muslim Brotherhood, which could end up with a majority of control of this new government. This president has already said that the president of Yemen should go. He is our friend. He has been helping us to fight Al-Qaeda. This president has been on the wrong side in nearly every situation in the Arab world, which has basically done nothing except to put that entire thing at risk.
And that's time, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, at least 3,500 civilians have been slaughtered in Syria. Today, the Arab League voted to suspend Syria. If the opposition and you were Commander-in-Chief requested military assistance, covert or smuggling or a no-fly zone, would you authorize either or both?
Well, first of all, I think that it's a good thing today that the Arab League suspended Syria. I think this administration should have been much more aggressive against Assad. I mean, it's ironic to me that Mubarak, who had been our ally for years, who had done everything he could to help the United States, who had helped us in the Iraq campaigns, who had done literally everything we had requested of him, he was dumped overnight by this administration in a way that signaled everybody in the world, don't rely on the United States because they'll abandon you in a heartbeat if they feel like it. Assad, who is our enemy and is an ally of Iran, has had amazingly soft treatment by our State Department, as though they are afraid to make him feel bad. I would actively approve taking those steps which would defeat his regime, which would probably be mostly covert. I don't think you need a no-fly zone. I think there are a number of steps you could take, and I think he would fall very rapidly. If the United States and Europe communicated clearly that Assad was going to go, I think you would find he represents a very tiny faction, and I think you would find him likely to be replaced very rapidly.
Congressman Paul, covert operations in Syria? A green light for you?
I think it would be a mistake. I think the Syrians ought to deal with their country. I think
But what about the 3,500 dead?
Well, there's been a lot of people killed throughout the world in the last century. You know, the Soviets and the Chinese killed hundreds of millions, but we didn't feel compelled morally to try to stop it. No, it's a tragedy, and it would be nice if they would accept different views. But for us to get in the middle of that and prop up the different dictatorships, this is why we get into this trouble. It's overthrowing dictatorships that we have supported that causes so much of this problem. So to get further involved, you want to have self-determination. We don't need to lose any more troops. You get in there with covert operations, then you have troops involved.
Thank you, Congressman.
And it's very costly.
Thank you,
It's not
Congressman.
a good idea.
Governor Romney, if I may ask you a 30-second follow-up to that, is it time for the Assad dictatorship to end? Would you use military force to do that?
Of course it's time for the Assad dictatorship to end, and we should use covert activity, as Speaker Gingrich has just indicated. Look, the reason I disagree with Ron Paul on this is that you have in Syria a nation which is an ally, the only Arab ally of Iran. It is arming Hezbollah. It represents an access of great significance to Iran, and as a result, because of our concern about Iran and their effort to become the hegemon in the Middle East, it is important for us as a nation to stand up and to help those efforts to replace Assad. And that means helping Turkey and Saudi Arabia, who are putting pressure on him, as well as covert activity of our own.
Governor, thank you very much. Now, as an unusual feature of this particular debate, we have with us tonight the two United States senators from South Carolina who have questions for the Republican candidates, and they will ask the question, but the moderators will direct the question to the appropriate candidates. And we're going to start with the senior senator, Lindsey Graham. Senator Graham, thank you for being with us here tonight.
Thank you. A comment first. Thank you all for running for president. I'm proud of each and every one of you. Thank you very much. Three-part question. I hope I can remember all three parts. Just within days of taking office, President Obama, by executive order, stopped the CIA from using classified enhanced interrogation techniques that are not waterboarding. There's a presumption that every person at Gitmo under the Obama administration should go into civilian court, not military commission. And the Obama administration recently said that any future captors in the war on terror would not go to Gitmo. Would you continue these policies? If you would change them, why?
And Mr. Kaine, that first question will go to you.
I absolutely would reverse all three of those policies. I'd keep Gitmo open. I would definitely allow the military to use enhanced interrogation techniques because they're terrorists. They are terrorists. Pampering terrorists isn't something that we ought to do. So I absolutely would reverse all three of those things that you indicated.
Senator Santorum, you have 1 minute on the same question.
Oh, I would agree with Herman Cain. The Gitmo is essential to leave open. We have to use enhanced interrogation techniques, all enhanced interrogation techniques. It has been proven to be successful in gathering information that was critical for us in the war against terror, and we need to continue that operation. And using civilian courts is one of the worst ideas I have ever heard. That civilian courts are given to people who have rights under our Constitution. People who have attacked our country and our foreign combatants do not have those rights. Our country stands for freedom. Our country stands for all of those proper ideals. But we stand with the Geneva Convention. But when people fight outside of those, there's a convention there for a reason. It's to get people to play by the rules. And when they don't play by the rules, they should not be given the benefit of those that do, and that's why we have Gitmo and these techniques.
Congressman Paul, 1 minute to you, sir.
I think that this is a mess. It's a mess because we have a bad foreign policy. We're pretending we're at war. We haven't declared the war, but we're at war against a tactic, and therefore there's no limits to it. So we create these monstrosities, and we do things outside the law. We come up with assassinations, allowing the president to decide who's going to be assassinated, and lo and behold, 3 Americans now have been on the list. They've been assassinated, but they don't talk about the second one because the second one happened to be a 16-year-old son of a Lockheed. So what are we doing here to accept this idea that our president is in this lawlessness to pursue, and that we someday will be subject to those same courts So no, you don't. You want to live within the law and obey the law, because otherwise it's going to be very bad for all of us. And this whole idea that now we can be assassinated by somebody that we don't even like to run our medical care, and giving this power to the president to be the prosecutor, the executor, the judge, and the jury, we better look at that carefully before you automatically endorse something like that.
Congressman, thank you very much.
Could I interject
Governor,
and say something?
I'm sorry,
Something?
there's actually a system at work here with regard to the senator's questions. So if I may, Governor Perry, you have 1 minute for Senator Graham's question.
Yeah. Let me just address Congressman Paul. And Congressman, I respect that you wore the uniform of our country, but in 1972, I volunteered to serve the United States Air Force. And the idea that we have our young men and women in combat today, Senator, where there are people who would kill them in a heartbeat, under any circumstance, use any technique that they can, for us not to have the ability to try to extract information from them to save our young people's lives is a travesty. This is war. That's what happens in war. And I am for using the techniques, not torture, but using those techniques that we know will extract the information to save young American lives, and I will be for it until I die.
Thank you, Governor. Representative Bachman, let me give you 30 seconds to pick up on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to respond to Ron Paul and his comments, because the people that the President of the United States gave orders to kill include Osama bin Laden. Now, I think all of us can agree this was a good idea for the President of the United States to make this decision. Ron Paul doesn't think so. But this was a very good idea for the President. After all, Osama bin Laden had no problem ordering the destruction of the Twin Towers or of the Pentagon. That resulted in over 3,000 lives. As well, Alaki, who we also killed, he has been the chief recruiter of terrorists, including Major Hassan at Fort Hood, including the underwear bomber over Detroit, and including the Times Square bomber. These were very good decisions that were made to take them out.
Congressman, thank you. I know, Ron Paul,
Yes.
you want to jump in, please.
I voted for the authority to go after bin Laden. I was upset because it took 10 years because we were diverted from going after him and doing the job. But that's a lot different than assassinating American citizens. I mean, he wasn't a citizen. But I do want to remind you that over 300 individuals were tried in civilian courts here that were charged with terrorism here. Most of them are in jail, and I don't think we should give up so easily on our rule of law.
Congressman Paul, thank you very much. Now it is time, if I may, Scott, it is time to call on Senator Jim DeMint from South Carolina. Sir, you have a question, and I will direct it to the four who were not called on the first time. So, Senator, please.
Thank you, and thank you all for being in South Carolina tonight. Federal spending and debt are not only our greatest economic problems, they're our largest national security problem. Yet the President and the Congress continue to spend and borrow at record levels. Just adjusting the spending on existing federal programs will not solve the problem. What federal functions will you eliminate or return to the states in order to balance our budget?
Governor Romney, to you, sir.
Absolutely. Right now we're spending about 25% of the economy at the federal level, and that has to be brought down to a cap of 20%. I'll get that done within my first term if I'm lucky enough to get elected. How do you do that? One is eliminating programs. A lot of programs we like, but we simply can't afford. The first one we'll eliminate, however, we're happy to get rid of. That's Obamacare, and that'll save us $95 billion a year by my fourth year. Other programs we like, the Endowment for Humanities, the National Endowment for the Arts, public broadcasting. These are wonderful features that we have in the government, but we simply can't go out and borrow money from China to pay for them. They're not that essential. In terms of returning programs to the states, Medicaid, a program for the poor, should be returned to the states. Let the states manage it. And if we grow it at inflation plus 1%, we'll save $100 billion a year by returning that to the states. And finally, We have to make the federal government more productive. It is just way too overburdened with excessive personnel. I'll reduce the personnel by at least 10% and link the pay of federal employees with the pay in the private sector. We should not pay government workers more than the people of America who are paying for them.
Governor Romney, that's time. Governor Huntsman, please address Senator DeMint's question, if you would, sir.
Thank you, Senator DeMint. It's an honor to be with you in your state, as it is many other great leaders from South Carolina. I think it's absolutely appropriate that Admiral Mullen would say that our most significant national security threat is right here at home, and it's our debt. I completely buy into that. And if we're going to get this nation moving in the right direction, we need to recognize that debt, as 70% of our GDP and moving up, becomes a national security problem. You look at where Japan is, well over 100% debt to GDP. Greece, 170% to GDP. Italy, 120%. So you get a sense of where our tomorrow is if we don't tackle the debt and spending. My speech is a very short one on debt and spending. It's 3 words: the Ryan Plan. I think the Ryan Plan sets out a template that puts everything on the table. Medicaid, like Governor Romney, I'd send back to the states. Education, I want to move closer to the states. You move education closer to the decision makers, the school boards, the families, you're a whole lot better off. And I think there are some economic development functions as well, legitimately, that you can move closer to the state. But we've got to get our spending closer to 19% of our GDP, as opposed to this unsustainable 24, 25%.
Governor Huntsman, thank you very much.
Or we shipwreck the next generation.
Mr. Speaker, would you please address Senator DeMint's question?
Sure. I think actually, Senator, that there are 4 interlocking national security problems. Debt and the deficit's one, energy is a second one, manufacturing is a third one, and science and technology is a fourth. And you need to have solutions that fit all 4. I mean, the thing that most worries me about this super committee is that they fail to understand that innovation and growth have to be at the heart of what we're doing. Example, we should have a training requirement for all unemployment compensation so nobody gets money for doing nothing. Now, that saves money, but it simultaneously enhances the human capital of the United States and makes us more competitive in dealing with China. We should be opening up offshore so that folks are able to deal directly with, for example, $29 billion of natural gas here. In that process, you can take some of the royalties and modernize the Charleston port, which you need for jobs here. I'm just trying to walk you through a way of thinking. I helped balance the budget for 4 consecutive years. I'm not very concerned. If we're serious, what you want to do is fundamentally reform and overhaul the federal government, fundamentally, while at the same time accelerating economic growth to bring unemployment down to 4%. That combination gets you back to a balanced budget.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Congresswoman Bachmann, please address Senator DeMint's question. What programs would you cut? How would you bring it down? The debt.
I want to thank you for asking that question, because that really is the #1 issue that's facing the country. We are in a terrible debt spiral, so much so that just in the month of October, we just added another $203 billion in debt. And when you consider the last time that Republicans controlled the budget, it was 2007, and the debt was $160 billion for the year. This was $203 billion just for the month of October. For every man, woman, and child in the United States, that means each one of us just took on another $650 in debt just for the month of October. That's the velocity that we're growing with debt. So what would I cut? I think really what I would want to do is be able to go back and take a look at Lyndon Baines Johnson's The Great Society. The Great Society has not worked, and it's put us into the modern welfare state. If you look at China, they don't have food stamps. If you look at China, they're in a very different situation. They save for their own retirement security. They don't have AFDC. They don't have the modern welfare state, and China's growing. And so what I would do is look at the programs that LBJ gave us at the Great Society, and they'd be gone.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you very much. Mr. Kaine, U.S. forces are coming under attack daily now from the enemy crossing over the border from Pakistan. As President, as Commander-in-Chief, would you order U.S. forces into Pakistan to clear out those safe havens of the enemy?
That is a decision that I would make after consulting with the commanders on the ground, our intelligence sources, after having discussions with Pakistan, discussions with Afghanistan, and here's why. We pointed out earlier that it is unclear as to where we stand with Pakistan. It is unclear where we stand with Afghanistan. We have our young men and women dying over there. And for that president to say that they would side with Pakistan, that is a problem. This is why we have to tread lightly and get all the information, because Pakistan is one of the 9 nations that has a nuclear weapon. So before I say we would do that, there's a lot of information that would need to be gathered.
Well, we've been at war in Afghanistan for 10 years, of course, and what is it about it that's unclear to you at this point? 30 seconds.
What's unclear is when the president approved the surge and then prematurely start pulling troops back, that wasn't a good strategy. Victory is not clearly defined. As president, I will make sure that the mission is clear and the definition of victory is clear, and that simply does not exist right now.
Governor Romney, would you send American troops across the border into Pakistan to clear out those safe havens? American men and women are coming under fire from those locations every single day.
The right way to deal with Pakistan is to recognize that Pakistan is not a country like other countries with a strong political center that you can go to and say, gee, can we come here? Will you take care of this problem? This is instead a nation which is close to being a failed state. I hope it doesn't reach that point, but it's a very fragile nation. It really has 4 centers of power: the ISI, which is their intelligence services, the military, separate group, you have the political structure, and of course the fundamentalists. And so we have to work with our friends in that country to get them to do some of the things we can't do ourselves. And bringing our troops into Pakistan and announcing at a stage like this that as president we would throw American troops into Pakistan could be highly incendiary in a setting like that. Right now, they're comfortable with our using drones to go after the people that are representing the greatest threat, and therefore I would continue to do that.
We have time, Governor, but are the Pakistanis comfortable with our using drones?
We have agreement with the people that we need to have agreement with to be able to use drones to strike at the people that represent a threat. And one of the things we have to do with our foreign aid commitments, the ongoing foreign aid commitments, I agree with Governor Perry. You start everything at 0. But one of the things we have to do is have understanding with the various power bases within the country that they're going to have to allow us, or they themselves, go after the Taliban and the Haqqani network to make sure they do not destabilize Afghanistan, particularly as we're pulling our troops out.
Senator Santorum, this week, National Journal and The Atlantic magazine reported that for various reasons, some related to paranoia in Pakistan about what the United States might do, they are moving operational nuclear weapons in that country unguarded in trucks. If you were commander-in-chief and intelligence came to you that one of those nuclear weapons was lost or possibly in the hands of terrorists, how would you respond?
Well, you'd have to respond with working with the Pakistani government and those who would feel as much threatened by that as we are. Mitt is absolutely right. There are various elements within the country that are very hard to deal with. You have a radical element. I would hope that we're talking about a situation where the military is somehow in control of that, and that we would have an element of the military that would be a problem. I would work with the military, I'd work with ISI, and get to where we could secure that weapons. Obviously, we would not, you'd have to take some action, but it would depend on the circumstances. It's sort of a hypothetical without having the knowledge of how it happened. It would hardly be answer the question.
That article also made clear that Special Operations Forces are being trained for this very eventuality. Is that something you would consider as Commander-in-Chief, deploying Special Forces to isolate, find that nuclear weapon, and, if necessary, take it over?
I would be working with the intelligence community within Pakistan. Again, it's a compromised community. I understand there are relationships with ISI, with the Haqqani network. Again, depending on the circumstances that we're dealing with here, you would hope you would be able to work with the intelligence community and work, if necessary, in support nature, whether it's with human intelligence or other types of surveillance, and potentially with the special forces on the ground. But again, this is clear. This is not one, you don't cowboy this one. You don't fly into Afghanistan, with Pakistan and try to interdict a nuclear weapon. You've got to work with the people in power, in the government, to make sure that
Speaker Gingrich, 30 seconds, your thoughts on this scenario?
Well, look, this is a good example of the mess we've gotten ourselves into since the Church Committee so-called reforms of the 1970s. We don't have a reliable intelligence service. We don't have independent intelligence in places like Pakistan. We rely on our supposed friends for intelligence. They may or may not be our friends, and the amount of information we might or might not have might or might not be reliable. This is a very good example of scenarios that people ought to look at seriously and say, we had better overhaul everything from rules of engagement to how we run the intelligence community, because we are in a very dangerous world.
Governor Huntsman, as we sit here, there is a crisis in Europe over debt, particularly in Italy and in Greece, and there is the threat of contagion onto Wall Street and U.S. banks. How do you prevent the euro crisis from becoming a problem in the United States?
Let me just on Pakistan for 1 second, because it's pretty clear. There's one man in charge in Pakistan. I've negotiated with the Pakistanis before, both in government and business. They're a tough bunch. General Ghiani's in charge. He's head of the military, which is head of ISI. It isn't President Zardari. Make no mistake about that. And I'd say you don't have a choice. Then I would pick up the phone and call Special Operations Command in Tampa and say, I've got a job for SEAL Team Number 6. Prepare to move. You don't have a choice. When you have a loose nuke, you have no choice. And we have to take charge. That's called leadership, and that's what I would do as president. With respect to Europe, we have two problems. One, Europe is our second largest export market. $240 billion we export to Europe every year, second only to Canada, $250 billion a year. As the Europe goes down, as the metastasis spreads, they're going to buy less. And we're going to lose jobs unless we can find other markets as those exports begin to diminish. That's going to be problem number one, and we need to prepare for that. Number two, it's going to spread throughout the banking system to the point where it's going to hit us in the United States, and with banks that are too big to fail in this country, we're in deep trouble.
And that is time. Thank you very much. We just have time for a quick follow-up on that same question. Let me come to Governor Perry. How do you prevent the European crisis from becoming a problem on Wall Street?
Well, the French and the Germans have the economic forethought to deal with this. They have the economy. And when you think about the euro and when it was established, it was done to be a competitor to the American dollar. They knew what they were doing. And now they find themselves with their overspending and the sovereign debt being built up.
Governor, I'm sorry, but it's the tyranny of the clock. We are all out of time. This is Scott Pelley with Major Garrett at the Republican debate. Thank you for joining us. Great to be with you.